Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're really cutting through the noise on a very critical topic: abuse and relationship dynamics. We're going beyond just physical violence in this deep dive. We're looking at something called coercive control, these more strategic, non-physical ways abusive behavior shows up, often way before any violence happens.
Exactly. And our sources today are, I think, particularly powerful because they connect two areas you might not usually see together. We're taking hard economic data on the financial side of abuse and combining it with psychological definitions of manipulation tactics, things like future faking. Our mission really is to help you understand that whole timeline, how subtle manipulation early on can lead to, well, very measurable economic damage.
And we've got some incredible data to back this up. We're leaning heavily on this really robust administrative data from Finland. It links police reports, actual domestic violence reports directly to people's job records, their earnings, from 2006 right up to 2019. It gives us a factual timeline. And the numbers are, frankly, quite jarring. About 1 in every 40 couples living together during that period had a police report filed for domestic violence.
1 in 40. That's 2.7% of all cohabiting relationships in the data set.
Yeah.
It's significant.
Definitely significant. Okay, so let's start unpacking this.
Yeah.
When people typically think about domestic abuse, the image is often, isolated incidents, visible fights. But the research and our understanding has really moved past that, hasn't it? It's not just about flare-ups. It's about seeing abuse as a consistent pattern, a pattern of harmful behavior designed specifically to establish power and control. What's the term for that?
That's what we call coercive control. It's really the whole package of behaviors, financial abuse, emotional, psychological pressure, all aimed at systematically stripping away the victim's independence, their autonomy, especially their economic power. And what's so crucial to grasp is that this control often comes first. It's the mechanism that kind of paves the way for physical violence later on, sometimes months or even years beforehand.
And it's good to see the legal system starting to recognize this more formally.
Yeah.
You mentioned economic abuse being included now,
Yeah.
like in the UK's domestic abuse bill from 2021.
That's right. And the U.S. Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act in 2021 also includes similar language. It's an overdue acknowledgement that abuse isn't just physical.
Absolutely. So if we look right back at the beginning of these relationships, when things might still seem okay on the surface, what are the early tactics? You mentioned grooming.
Yes. One of the first you might see is something called love bombing.
Love bombing. We hear that term thrown around. It sounds pretty intense. What does it actually involve?
It really is intense. It's this overwhelming flood of affection, constant attention, often coupled with really extravagant spending right at the start. It's like manufacturing relationship intensity overnight. So maybe they insist on paying for absolutely everything, jump to saying, I love you incredibly fast, try to monopolize all your time. It builds this dependency very quickly.
I can see how that could feel overwhelming, but maybe also quite flattering, especially if someone's feeling a bit vulnerable.
Exactly. That's the hook.
Yeah.
And that spending. It might feel generous, but it often serves a strategic purpose. It can create this subtle or not so subtle feeling that you're indebted to them, emotionally or financially. And this often goes hand in hand with another tactic, future faking.
Future faking. Okay, that sounds,
That's right.
yeah, manipulative just from the name. What does that look like in practice?
It's basically painting this incredibly detailed, exciting picture of a shared future. Moving in together, getting married, having kids, grand travel plans, hitting specific milestones. But here's the catch. They make these promises without any real intention or maybe even the ability to follow through. The whole point is to get you hooked, emotionally invested in this beautiful future that, well, frankly, only exists in their words.
That seems incredibly cruel and tricky, too, because when a relationship is new, that new relationship energy or NRE, people are naturally excited and optimistic about the future. So how do you tell the difference? How do you separate genuine enthusiasm from this strategic faking?
That's a great question. It often comes down to the language they use, and crucially, whether there's any actual action behind the words. Strategic future faking tends to involve making very firm statements about the future. Things like, when we live together, we'll get a cat, or next year, we're definitely buying a house. It's presented as a done deal. Compare that to genuine inquiries or collaborative planning, like, what do you think about maybe looking at places together next year?
So it's less of a discussion and more like an announcement.
Yeah.
They decided the future for you and you're just expected to be on board.
Precisely. Now, we should acknowledge sometimes people overpromise because they're maybe people pleasers or just a bit emotionally immature. It might not always be intentionally malicious. But in the context of coercive control, the intent is often very strategic. And honestly, regardless of their internal motive, the outcome for the person on the receiving end, the hurt, the confusion, waiting for a life that never materializes that damage is the same. And it's measurable damage.
Right. And that brings us neatly from the sort of psychological manipulation to the hard data.
Yeah.
Because the Finnish research shows this control isn't just abstract feelings, it hits the wallet
Yeah.
immediately. What does that data tell us about what happens financially to a woman right when she moves in with a man who later turns out to be abusive?
Okay, so the data gives us three really crucial facts here, and they paint a picture of something quite strategic, not random. It's financially devastating. First, there's an immediate decline. Right away, upon moving in with a man who eventually becomes physically abusive, women experience these large, significant drops in their earnings. The research put a number on it, about €1,000 lower per year. And not just earning, their employment rate drops too, by about 3 to 6 percentage points. And this isn't a blip, it lasts. The data shows this suppression sticks around for at least 5 years.
Wait, hang on. €1,000 less income every year, plus a higher chance of being unemployed just from moving in, that's a massive financial hit for anyone,
Yeah.
especially if you're trying to stay independent.
It's a huge penalty. Second key finding. The data really suggests there's an abusive type. What I mean is, these specific men tend to impose these economic costs on all their female partners, even in relationships where no physical violence was ever reported to the police. This points towards it being a characteristic of the man himself, a persistently suppressive type, rather than just a bad match or a difficult relationship phase.
So it's not about the specific dynamic with one person. It's something they carry with them from relationship to relationship. That really reframes how you think about it. It's less situational, more inherent.
Exactly. And the third fact is, maybe from an economic standpoint, the most striking. There's a clear efficiency loss for the household overall. These abusive relationships are linked with actual decreases in the total income coming into the home. And critically, the male partner doesn't make up for the woman's lost earnings. His income doesn't rise to compensate, which means, purely economically, the behavior doesn't make sense for the household unit. They are quite literally poorer together.
Okay, so if the household as a whole is worse off financially, then the abuser's actions aren't about maximizing the family's wealth.
Yeah.
So what is the strategic purpose then? If it's not money for the unit, what's the gain for him?
It makes perfect sense if you consider the abuser's goal isn't shared prosperity, but control. They are intentionally, systematically making it harder for the woman to earn money, to work. Why? To shrink her economic outside options. The goal is pretty simple and pretty grim. Sabotage her ability to leave the relationship later, make it financially harder or even unthinkable for her to survive on her own.
Yeah, that link. Financial suppression directly enabling entrapment. It's chilling. It reminds me of accounts you hear from survivors, where the very first sign of control was financial. Maybe gentle discouragement from work, suggesting she quits her job. And then, when she was dependent, escape felt impossible when the physical abuse started. The finances become the chain.
Absolutely, that's the core mechanism. So, based on these findings, the researchers actually built a theoretical model to try and explain this pattern. The basic idea is this. Abusive men often hide their true nature at the start, maybe using that love bombing, future faking we talked about. They draw the woman in. Then they use ongoing coercive control, especially this economic suppression, to chip away at her independence. Because they instinctively know, or perhaps learn, that if she becomes too economically self-sufficient, she's more likely to leave.
So her outside option, her ability to be okay financially without him, that's the real threat to his control. Okay, so this model makes some specific predictions you could actually test with the data, right? What do they find?
They found strong support for two key predictions in the Finnish data. The first was about the timing of the violence itself. The data confirmed women with lower outside options, so maybe less education or lower earnings before the relationship, they experienced the first police report of physical violence significantly earlier in the relationship.
Wow. That makes a sort of tragic sense, doesn't it? If her options are already limited, he can escalate to violence sooner because her ability to just walk away is already compromised.
Exactly. The barrier to exit is lower. But the second prediction is really counterintuitive, and it tells you a lot about the abuser's calculation. It's about non-monotonic suppression. What they found was that the greatest amount of suppression of the woman's work and earnings happens to women with medium outside options. Think maybe high school graduates, women with some vocational skills, but perhaps not advanced degrees.
That's fascinating. Not the women with the lowest options, nor the highest, but the ones in the middle. Why would they face the most intense economic sabotage?
It seems to boil down to a kind of perverse cost-benefit analysis for the abuser. It's about the efficiency of control, if you will. Women with very low options might already be seen as locked in economically. Significant suppression might not even be necessary from his perspective. On the other end, women with very high options, say doctors, lawyers, women with strong careers and high earning potential, they're just much harder and maybe costlier for him to suppress.
Right, convincing her to give up a high-paying established career would take a lot more effort, maybe too much.
Precisely. Their attachment to the workforce is strong. So that middle group, they represent the optimal target for sabotage. Suppressing their options is feasible and effective enough to significantly undermine their ability to leave without requiring an extreme amount of effort from the abuser. This finding really highlights the strategic, almost predatory calculation involved.
This whole analysis just turns the traditional understanding on its head, doesn't it? The classic finding that giving women better economic options reduces domestic violence. That was always framed as, well, she gets more bargaining power inside the relationship, so he treats her better to keep her.
Yes, that was the standard interpretation. But our data, this Finnish data, it supports a completely different mechanism. It shows that higher outside options facilitate quicker breakup.
Hmm.
When the researchers looked at situations where women's outside job prospects improved, maybe due to local economic conditions, they saw a big significant jump, about 20%, in the breakup rate specifically among abusive couples. And crucially, you didn't see that same effect in non-abusive couples. Their breakup rates didn't change much when women's options improved.
So it wasn't about fixing the toxic relationship through negotiation. It was about giving women the financial means, the independence, the security blanket, really, to actually get out safely. The money was the escape route, not the bargaining chip.
Exactly. It provided the means to execute an exit.
Okay, so this entire timeline from the initial, maybe confusing love bombing and future faking through to this calculated economic suppression, it shows just how hard it must be for someone caught in this to even realize the danger they're in, especially early on when things might feel intense and romantic. So what does this mean for, for you listening? How can someone start to tell the difference between just normal relationship difficulties and these genuine, serious red flags?
That's such an important question. I think the key differences lie in persistence, the level of harm, and accountability. Normal relationship issues. They tend to be temporary, maybe situational. You disagree about chores, someone's stressed from work and a bit distant for a while. These things are generally non-toxic. You can usually work through them with mutual effort, assuming there's underlying respect. Red flags, on the other hand, signal consistent, repeating, harmful patterns. They cause real emotional or psychological damage. And critically, the partner demonstrating these behaviors typically lacks accountability. They resist change, maybe get defensive, or try to turn the tables when confronted. Control is often their default response to disagreement.
That lack of accountability really stands out. The
Yeah.
refusal to see their own part in the problem. Are there other warning signs, maybe things people dismiss early on?
Definitely. You really need to pay attention to how they interact with the rest of the world. Do they have generally poor relationships with others? Are they constantly bad-mouthing friends, family, colleagues? Especially ex-partners. Is it always the ex's fault, with them painted as the perpetual victim? Also, look out for excessive jealousy. Not just a little insecurity, but constant accusations, possessiveness, treating you like property, not a partner. Then there's the push for isolation. Does he subtly, or maybe not so subtly, try to cut you off from your support network, your friends, your family? That increases your dependence on him. And finally, it comes back to that accountability piece, taking zero responsibility for their own actions or feelings, always blaming external things, or worse, blaming you for their anger, their failures, their bad moods.
It all seems to circle back to establishing that complete control psychologically and, as the data shows, financially too. And once those outside options, that independence is worn down, their control becomes almost total. Hashtag tag tag outro. Wow. We've covered a huge amount of ground here. We've gone from those initial manipulative grooming tactics right through to the cold, hard economic facts. I think to summarize the core insight, coercive control isn't just some side effect of abuse. It's a dynamic. It's strategic. It's a process involving emotional and economic sabotage that actually comes before physical violence and enables it.
Absolutely. And the takeaways, both for policy and just for us as individuals, seem pretty clear. On the policy side, programs that genuinely boost women's economic independence are vital. They directly build those outside options that we've seen are so crucial for empowerment and for enabling a safe exit. And personally, the importance of self-awareness, of trusting your gut, it just can't be overstated. You need to really scrutinize that gap between someone's words and their actions. If the grand promises feel a bit too good or too specific to be true, or if you feel subtly discouraged from pursuing your own career, your own financial security, that needs to be seen as a massive red flag, not just, NRE or a normal relationship discussion.
And that's really powerful advice. Trusting your gut, watching for that disconnect. So, knowing that these relationships are often built strategically around maintaining control, what's the final, maybe provocative thought you want to leave our listeners with, particularly thinking about how institutions sometimes try to intervene?
Well, thinking about how this control is established, the data really makes you question some common interventions, like mandatory couples mediation, for instance. The findings strongly suggest that if a relationship is fundamentally characterized by this kind of strategic coercive control, mediation might actually be counterproductive. Why? Because the abuser could potentially use the time gained through the mediation process, the weeks or months it takes to further exert economic control, to further undermine the partner's independence while appearing to engage in solving the problem. So, in that specific context, an intervention that looks helpful on the surface, offering a space for discussion, might unintentionally end up reinforcing the very dynamic of abuse, making it even harder for the victim to find that escape route later. It really highlights how critical it is to understand the underlying dynamic before we decide how best to help.